Hello, welcome everyone to the Hope Rising. We are a group of ladies, a faith-based group of ladies that are gathering together every Friday to learn more about the heroin epidemic. And usually 3 of the 4 Fridays of the month, we invite a guest speaker to come, someone that's an expert in their field regarding the heroin epidemic and how their jobs will intersect with either those battling addictions, the families of those battling addictions. Today we are just so delighted that we have DeVore with us, and in just a moment I'll introduce you to her. But we have just a couple of other things first that I'd like to mention to you. In the past few weeks, those of you who have been watching the live stream know that we have been talking about the Operation Christmas Child, and that we had taken boxes down to Cornerstone Baptist Church. A few weeks ago, we live streamed from Cornerstone with Pastor David Mihalovich. And last week on the live stream, I shared with you all about Pastor Mihalovich, his right index finger and his middle finger came in contact with a planer joiner machine, and his index finger basically was filleted, and his middle finger also had contact with the blade. And I asked him if we could pray and invite folks on the live stream to pray, and he said yes. So today I did speak with him again, and it looks like the middle finger will be able to be saved. On Monday, he goes back to his doctor in Timonium, and they'll talk about the right index finger, and he is right-handed. So if you all would please continue to pray for David Mihalovich, Pastor David Mihalovich, that the Lord will make a way for this finger to be saved. When he did injure his hand, he was doing a project for their youth of their church. This is a gentleman that is very involved at Cornerstone in the Christian education, and he is also the fellow that at their Cornerstone that headed up the Operation Christmas Child for our community. They did gather over 2,000 boxes. I believe it was 2,410 shoe boxes came in to Cornerstone. They were packed up in cartons and put in a box truck and taken to the next site. So this is a church, this is a gentleman that really does a lot for our community. So as the Lord brings Pastor Mihalovich to your mind, would you please remember to pray for him, pray against any infection that may try to set in, and just join with us. We know that through the blood of Jesus Christ, there is healing power in the blood of Jesus, and we know that that finger can be saved. So next Friday, for those of you who have maybe come once or twice here physically to my house for this prayer meeting, or if you've watched the last 10 months on live stream, you are welcome to come here. Next Friday, the 15th of December, we will be having our Christmas potluck party. It's going to be a lot of fun. Susie McKenzie has some great games lined up. One game we're going to play, it's kind of a white elephant game where you might have something around your house that you don't really use very often. The one time I played this game at a different church, they played it and some fella brought an LP record. I thought that was the funniest thing. So it's things that maybe you don't use, something just like a gag gift. Maybe it's an old jewelry ring box, a candle, something where maybe $5 or less. I don't want you all to have to spend a lot of money. So that's going to be next week. And like I said, it's going to be a potluck. And anybody who wants to bring chocolate fudge, that's okay with me. All righty. Thank you again so much for joining us. We are just delighted today to have DeVore from Garrett County with us. I met Karen last June at the Frostburg State Symposium about the drug epidemic, and she just captivated me with her poise. Her knowledge on the heroin epidemic was remarkable, and she graciously agreed to come to our Hope Rising prayer group to talk to us and those of you on live stream viewing, and to talk about the journey that she and her life and her family's life went through regarding the heroin epidemic. And so at this time, I'd like to turn this over to Karen, and she can tell you a little bit about her education. She is just extremely educated lady, talented, beautiful. This is Karen DeVore.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm not quite sure I deserved all that. A little bit about me. I was born and raised in Frostburg, Maryland. Lived in West Virginia early in my career. I've spent 30 years in public education. I'm currently in an executive director position. My title is Executive Director of Curriculum Instruction and Administration for Garrett County Public Schools. I tell people that I'm the Executive Director of the CIA. It's a little bit easier, to say. I spent the last 12 years in principal positions in Garrett County. I was the principal at Northern Middle School and the principal at Accident Elementary School, both of which I absolutely loved and adored. Prior to that, I was in Allegheny County for about 15 years in a multitude of roles. I started my career out as a special education teacher, and that truly is really still where my heart lies, is with children with special needs. All children, but I have a tender spot for children with special needs. So it was interesting that you mentioned my knowledge on the heroin epidemic. I can assure you that when my family and I started this journey, I knew nothing about that, nothing at all. And I tell people now I have a PhD in addiction, and through our experience. It's I say that jokingly. So our journey began. I will tell you that my story is a story of hope. And the reason I share it, it's not an easy story to tell, even though it ends with a happy ending. For now, it's still not an easy story to tell, and every time I tell it, I reach into the depths of my soul to some very dark times in our lives. My son struggled with opiate addiction for about 6 years. My husband and I weren't aware of it for the first couple of years. We became aware of it. I was sitting in my office, my little principal office, and I got a call from my husband, and he said that a family member told him that Colin was addicted to opiates, addicted to Oxycontin was what he said. And I said, why would he say that? That's ridiculous. Why would he say that? It was not anywhere in my realm of understanding. And but I knew that Colin, my son's name is Colin, was coming to our house later that day. And so I left school early that day, and I went down to meet him. And it's one of those moments. I have several moments throughout this journey that are just frozen in my memory, but it's one of those moments that's frozen. And he was sitting on the bar stool in our kitchen in our house in Frostburg, and I said, Colin, your cousin said you were addicted to Oxycontin. And he looked at me and he said, Mom, I have it under control. And I just froze, because I just wasn't expecting that, you know. So we went through a couple things, and he tried a couple things on his own, and he said he had it under control, and I believed him, and I didn't know anything at all about opiate addiction, so I just kind of went with that. But as time went on, it became more aware to my husband and to me that things were not going well, and he was not doing well. We met with him one evening on the porch of a rental house that we owned in Frostburg, where he was living, and he said to us, I'm ready for help. I'm ready for help. So we started that Monday morning. That was a Saturday evening, and he agreed to go with me on Monday morning to rehab. And I knew nothing about rehab, and I knew nothing about opiate addiction. And I picked him up probably about 6 o'clock in the morning, that Monday morning, and we drove to Northern Virginia to an intake facility that I had been made aware of. And I did that because of the stigma. I didn't want to go to anywhere locally. I didn't want anybody to know that this was in our family. So we drove to Northern Virginia. We went through the intake. The place was called CATS. All these years later, I remember it. I'm sure it stood for something, but I don't remember what it was. But Colin had packed a bag, and he was willing to get help. And in my mind, this was it. He was going to get the help, and it was going to be over. So we went through the intake there. They interviewed Colin alone. They interviewed us together, and it was quite time-consuming. They came out, and they said they weren't going to treat him. And I said, I don't understand. They said, your insurance won't cover it. And I said, well, I have a credit card. I take my credit card. And she said, no, if you're willing to pay out of pocket for your son, you should send him somewhere better. There are good places in Florida. That's what she said to me. And it was a really dingy, drab place, and was not some place that I thought we would ever end up in, a place like that. But I was willing to leave him there because he was willing to do it. And I looked at the woman. Colin was off, I don't know. He wasn't right there then. And I said, I don't understand. I don't understand why the insurance won't pay for this. And she said, I know. You tell them that you're shooting liquid heroin into your veins and they won't help you. And I said, wait, what? And she just kind of went off, and I kind of went off. It was a very confusing time. And I said to Colin, we left there, and I said to Colin, why would she say that? And he said, I don't know, Mom. I don't know why she'd say that. That's crazy. Because I thought we were talking about a pill addiction. So we left there. We went to a hospital, an emergency room in in Northern Virginia. And it was a hot day, and we stayed for hours, and Colin was getting sick, and he was sweating, and he was agitated. But we sat in that waiting room for hours, and he went through an intake, and we went through an intake together. And in the end, they said, we don't treat opiate addiction here. And probably this, I didn't even know what opiate meant. I didn't know at that time. So we left there, and I didn't know what to do. I just felt completely alone and distraught. And he was sick, and he was shaking, and we started heading home, and he was getting worse. And so I drove to the emergency room at Sacred Heart Hospital. That's the hospital where Colin was born, and where my mother worked for many years. And the reason I tell that part of the story is because I started out the day trying to stay away from the stigma and anybody knowing us. So we went there, and they put him in one of those emergency rooms, and I came in, and they had him in a hospital gown, and he was sitting there completely gaunt, dark circles under his eyes, skinny. His skin was just so grayish white. And I walked into the room, and on his right arm he had a series of little bruises going up his arm. And I said, well, buddy, what happened there? And he just glared at me, and he said, there, now are you happy? You know everything. And that's when I realized he was shooting liquid heroin into his veins. And I left that room, and I went over to the public restroom in the emergency department, and I got sick, and I just laid on the floor crying. And it was another one of those moments frozen in time. And then something just hit me, and it was kind of like, your son needs you. So I just kind of pulled myself up, and I went back over there, and they basically just gave him a pamphlet for a methadone clinic and a patch to try to help with some of the symptoms he was experiencing, and it didn't help. But we went home, and we just kind of rode the night out. And when I say rode the night out, I mean it. It was horrific. I don't even know if Colin remembers that night, but it's something I'll never forget. So the next morning we were there when the doors of the methadone clinic opened, and they did an intake. So if you're counting, that's 4 intakes in less than 24 hours, or about 24 hours. And the woman sitting there started talking about his vital signs and everything like that, and look at this, look at that. And I'll never forget this. She said, "Dose him. He needs dosed." And I'm going, "Yeah, yeah, dose him. Like save my son. Yeah, dose him." I had no idea what that meant, but that's when he started. Well, I think he had done methadone prior to that, trying it, but that was my first experience with methadone, and he went through the methadone therapy, but he despised being on methadone. He switched to Suboxone when that came in. He despised that. Colin despised being addicted. He despised being required to take something. So we went through 3 or 4 years of a cycle of rehab, methadone clinic, Suboxone clinic, another rehab. And he would level out, like when he was on the Suboxone or the methadone, but then he despised it, so he'd try to taper himself off, and then he'd just go back to using again because of the cravings. And but he at one point went to a facility in Pennsylvania called the Caron Center, CARON, and from there he went to a halfway house, and he started working in the Pennsylvania school system, working with autistic kids. He's very, very gifted at working with children and working with people with disabilities, like his mom and dad. So he was just barely holding it together, but really not functioning well. And he called me one day and he said, "Mom, I think I found something that might help me." And I said, "What is it?" And he said, "It's Ibogaine." Of course, I had never heard of that. He told me what it was. I said, "Well, what is it?" He said, he said it's a psychedelic plant-based medicine. And I was like, "No, we're not doing that." And at that point, my husband and I had thrown a tremendous amount of money at trying to save our son. And the cost involved with this was a tenth of what we had already spent in the multitude of other things that we had attempted. And he was getting worse, and he was losing hope, and it was very, very obvious. And on more than one occasion throughout this time, but specifically during this time, we were very concerned about him not making it of his own. He just despised his life. So my husband and I decided that we would do it. And when we talked about it, we said, in the end, we want to say we did everything. We even did this. So on January 2nd of 2012, we put our oldest son on the plane with a one-way ticket to Mexico. I was wiring money to a woman. I had no idea who she was. I had no idea what Ibogaine was or really what it entailed. I read everything that I could read. I watched every video that I could watch. And I did, in the back of my mind, and certainly in my heart, I had hope. But when my husband and I put him on the plane, we didn't think we'd see him again. My husband wanted to put a tracking device in him so that when it was over, when the nightmare was over, we could find his body and have closure to the hell we had been living. And when we put him on that plane, my husband knows that part of Virginia like the back of his hand. He'd just done a lot of work there. And hours went by, and I looked at him and I said, "Where are we?" And we just had driven for hours after putting him on that plane. And we really thought that when we put him on that plane, that was the last time we would see him. We really did. It took us 6 hours to get back to Frostburg from Dulles Airport. So that was January 2nd. And I was in contact with him. I'd been it was only for a 2-week treatment, but we got him a one-way ticket because we didn't know what to bring him back to. You know, I knew, and all these years that we're going through this, I'm researching everything. He's researching everything. We're trying to learn as much as we can about it. But there was nothing for him to come back to in Western Maryland. There was nothing for him to come back to in Pennsylvania, where he had last lived. and everything that I read said he's got to change his environment. I remember my husband saying to him, well, Colin, maybe you'll just want to stay in Mexico for a while. And Colin, who was angry at the world at that point in his life, I remember him saying, why the hell would I want to live in a third world country? And but it was, you know, it was a 2-week treatment, and I'd been in contact with the lady who was facilitating the treatment, and we just agreed that he could just stay in the area for a while. So after the treatment, he was basically homeless in Mexico in a little jungle town for a while. He lived with a guy who was cleaning out a dojo, which is a martial arts gym, and he was helping clean out that gym and stuff like that. And he started walking back up the mountain to the clinic house where he had been treated, and he started working with them, sitting with the people who were being treated, washing their dishes, sweeping their floors, and he just started working with the lady who was facilitating those treatments, and he ended up working for her. She then opened an aftercare house because she kind of saw a lot through Colin's treatment that there was just a real need for aftercare. So she opened up a second house in the jungle village. It's called San Pancho. It's just like heaven on earth in Mexico. And Colin lived in the house, and then when people went through the treatment, they came and stayed with him for a while before going home. So again, he went on January 2nd. In March of that same year, my husband and our other son and I went down for a visit to see Colin for the first time. And I knew he was getting better. I could tell by the things he was saying, and I could tell by the sound of his voice, and I could tell that he was reconnecting. I remember saying to him, I had read an article before he left about addiction being the disease of the soul. And I remember saying to him, Colin, maybe you'll find your soul in Mexico. So in March, we went down for a 1-week visit, and I always tell this part of the story like this. I literally was like a racehorse at the gate trying to get through customs to see my boy. I really had never really been away from him that long at that point. And when I got through customs, he was standing there. There was a guy who was tattooed from his head to his toes, standing there beside Colin, frizzy hair. And I saw him. And his eyes were, the thing I remember is his eyes were blue. You know, they weren't dark, they weren't sunken, they were blue. And his skin was bright, and he was smiling, and he was just, he was back. It was, my boy was back, and I ran to him, and we hugged, and I cried, and he cried, and the tattoo guy cried, and I think strangers walking by were crying. It was, I tell this when I tell the story, only 2 other times did I experience that emotion in my life, and it was at childbirth both times. And it was like I got him back. So he lived in San Pancho for a while after that. And then he and somebody, he started going to international Ibogaine conferences and learning more about the medicine and working with the medicine. It turns out, you know, as God would have it, I think Colin went to the absolute best Ibogaine provider in the world. It just happened that way. And if I can back up a bit, when he told me he wanted to do the Ibogaine and he found this lady and he had talked with her and he felt like he was connected with her and everything, as I said, we'd spent, you know, a small fortune already, and I really didn't think, it just sounded so bizarre. I didn't think it was going to work. So I'm a bargain shopper, so I started getting online myself, and I found a guy named Matt in Toronto who could do it for about half the price that this lady in Mexico was going to do it. And I said, well, Colin, I found a guy in Toronto named Matt who can do it for half the price, and you can drive there, you don't need a passport, you don't need to fly. And Colin said, Mom, I'm afraid I wouldn't survive that. I really feel like this woman has my best interest at heart. I really feel like she gets me. So that's why we sent him there, and there's no doubt in my mind, you know, when I tell you that I was wiring money to this woman, I had no idea who she was. I had never wired money before. I didn't even know how to do that then. that woman is now one of the nearest and dearest. As you can imagine, people in my, I mean, I adore her. I think of her like a family member. She saved our family. Because the truth is, and I always say this, God only sent us 2 sons, and I wouldn't have been okay without one of them. So Colin stayed there and worked with her, went to Ibogaine conferences, learned more about the medicine, and he and another guy from that clinic moved to the city of Oaxaca, Mexico, with the intent of opening a clinic there. And they treated a couple people there, but it didn't really get off the ground too much. And then the guy that he was working with went back to the States. And as luck would have it, Colin was, he got his TEFL certification, which is certification in teaching English as a second language, and was teaching at an English school. And the wonderful Paloma came to school there. She was finishing her degree in English. Colin was teaching little kids, and she was finishing her degree in English. He met her and fell in love with her, and they got married, and they now have I am the grandmother of the most adorable 2-year-old little girl. And we since bought a property in Puerto Escondido, Mexico, where Colin and Paloma and Mila live. And it has 3 different living units. And he uses, B&B 2 of the units, they live in one. And then he uses the 3rd unit as a treatment center. And he does Ibogaine treatments in Oaxaca, Mexico, Puerto Escondido. And that's pretty much our story. I would like to say that my story is a story of hope, and my message is not Ibogaine, it has to be Ibogaine. It's the story I tell because it's the story that worked for us. But my story, my message is to keep trying until you find what does work for you. And I know a lot of people who live in recovery and have found recovery in other ways. I tell the Ibogaine story because that's what worked for our family. Thank you.
Do you mind taking questions?
Not at all.
All right, ladies. I know y'all are just sizzling with questions, so we'll pass the mic around and we can have questions.
Ibogaine is, and I'm not an expert. Colin is, and if he wants to tell me something more, he's gonna join us, or at least join me. Ibogaine is it's from the root of a plant, of an iboga plant. It's a plant. It's the root of a plant.
And how do they use it in treatment, or what do they
do? So it's they curate the plant, and they, like, when you take it, you take a capsule, and different providers do the treatment differently. Some are in clinical settings, hospital-like settings. The modality that we're most familiar with is kind of like a resort type setting, where they just prepare a room with candles and music from the Bwiti tribe. That's who started that's where the iboga comes from, is Gabon, Africa, and the Bwiti tribe use this plant. They call it their rite of passage, and every teenage boy in their tribe goes through the rite of passage by going through an iboga experience. I should add to this, which is probably an interesting part of the story. About 6 months after we were in Mexico for that first trip, my husband went back and did an ibogaine treatment, a 2-week treatment. He had a relationship with alcohol for many, many, many years, and dropped it in that 2-week period. Has not had a drink of alcohol in 6 years. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. But I would like to talk a little bit about that, about my husband's experience. You know, he and I, we've been married 33 years. We've only ever argued about 2 things: his addictions and how to raise the children. You know, which is tough stuff. But whenever we would try to get help, he was always told that he wasn't an alcoholic. But what I realized in going through this process was I don't think he was an alcoholic. I think he had a depression issue, and he self-medicated with alcohol. He was a tremendous provider, never missed a day of work. He was a wonderful husband and a phenomenal father, but he just had a demon that he was dealing with, and he was trying to medicate it with alcohol. He did the treatment 2 weeks and came home and has never had a drink since then. A year after that, when Colin started the clinic in Oaxaca, I went and did an Ibogaine treatment. I've never had an addiction. But you have to understand that I had been dealing with addiction basically all of my life. I am my biological father was a severe alcoholic, and although I didn't have to be raised by him, it was still, it still affects you. And then going through what we did in our family, just the trauma, and I saw the peace that Colin had in his life. In an individual that you never thought would ever be comfortable in his own skin, and now is probably the person I feel is most comfortable in his own skin. And I saw the peace that it gave my husband, and so I did the treatment myself, and I can honestly say that unequivocally it is the most clarifying thing I've ever done in my life. So when I wanted to tell you that before when you asked me how it works. How it worked for me was I took the medicine, and just they had candles in the room, and they had African music playing, and I think you don't really go to sleep, but you feel like you're asleep, but you just lie in the bed and you just have visions. Just before going into this addiction, becoming aware of the addiction with Colin, my mother had died, and I was completely devastated by her death, and I had a lot of guilt because I felt like I was dealing with my own grief and not attending to him when he needed me. So when I had the Ibogaine treatment, I had visions. I literally had visions of every single person every single family member in my life, living and dead, and it wasn't, but it's not like visions, it's like you're in the room with them, and it's just very, very clarifying, and very soothing, and I've been in love with my husband since I was in the 10th grade. I had a terrible crush on him. We met in kindergarten. We met on the first day of kindergarten. He kicked my blocks over. And so I literally have known him all my life. And, we had been through a lot of trials and tribulations in our marriage, not the least of which was dealing with these addictions. And while I was having my Ibogaine experience, I had the most realistic. He was there, and it was his little 5-year-old fat-faced self right there in front of me. And you know how you see those it morphs from one face to another face, and it morphed through the different stages in his life, and I've literally known him my whole life. And at the end, it was just his face as it was at that time, and he just grabbed my hand and pulled my hand up and put it. Sorry, that's my microphone. Put my hand on his chest, and I don't know. Those were my two most realistic experiences. So, to say how it works, they don't really know how it works. But in dealing with addictions, I'll tell you something else. Truthfully, very honestly, when my husband went, he came back 2 weeks later. He had lost 35 pounds, and I was secretly hoping that would happen for me, but it didn't. It didn't. The medicine didn't work on me that way. But in dealing with addictions, they do know that it rewires the brain and that it resets the opiate receptors. in the brain. So it's a very dangerous drug for addicts to take because it does rewire the receptors, the opiate receptors in the brain, and if you use afterwards, it can be extremely, it can be fatal. And we knew that. I mean, you know, you have to understand that's how desperate we were when we sent Colin there. We knew that he could, you know, we didn't know anything about Mexico when we sent him there. We had only ever been to resorts, and you know, this is not like where we've been in the last 6 years. We haven't been anywhere near a resort. You know, we are in jungle villages and small towns and big Mexican cities and living with the natives. And I've gone to Mexico for 2 weeks and never heard English spoken except for, you know, my son and my daughter-in-law. So we knew that he could die in Mexico. We knew he could do drugs in Mexico. One really telling factor in all this is, you know, this was an individual who was driven for years by opiates. That was his, you know, if you know about drug addicts, you know that they just, nothing else matters. That they just want the drugs. And this was only 2 months into his sobriety when we went to Mexico. And I'd heard all the stories about Mexican pharmacies, like you can walk in and get illegal things, you can get anything you want in Mexican pharmacies. And I looked at him in March of 2012 when he was 2 months sober, and I said to him, Colin, are you ever tempted to go into the pharmacies and try to get something? And he looked me square in the eye and he said, Mom, I have the key to the opiate safe. And I said, what does that mean? And at the clinic where he was then working, you know, they have to use opiates to help taper people down when they first get there. They have to use whatever, I don't know what opiates, but he had the key to the safe 2 months into his, I mean, and this was a guy who, you know, for 6 years was just chasing the dragon. So I became a believer. Thank you for your question. I hope I answered it.
So do they just set up the room of candles and is there music or quietness and give you the drug?
No, it's music. It's and again, different people do it different ways. And there are clinical settings, there are hospital-like settings. I'm not familiar with those because the way it was done in the clinic where Colin was treated and where my husband did his and when I did mine, and the way we treat people now is we just set up the candles and we play the Bwiti music. It's the African music.
And then you leave the room.
Oh no, they stay with you constantly. You mean that? Oh no, there's somebody with you all the time. They have to monitor your blood pressure and your pulse, and that's constant.
But
I mean, you don't know they're there.
You don't ask them questions or no conversation.
No, I mean, I remember getting up and going to the bathroom, and maybe they helped me walk to the bathroom and things like that. I remember doing that. It's kind of like a subconscious, I don't know, semi-conscious.
How long does it last, the session?
About 24 hours. Yeah.
And you just take one pill?
Uh-huh. Well, there are different levels of the medicine, and I am not an expert on that. I know what they're called. There's TA and there's HCl and there's root bark, and but I don't know what's what. And so when I first got there, the time that I went for my treatment, I took a 2-week vacation and went down. After I'd been there a couple days, they gave me some TA, which is the lower level of it, and I got a really and you take that and we went out, went hiking, and you know, Mexico's just such a gorgeous country, and there's so much to do, and it's just the weather's beautiful and the food is fresh, and you just, you know, pick it right off the trees and eat it, and the people are just amazing, and so I took the TA and we went out hiking and stuff, and I got a really, really, really bad headache from it. So they hydrated me, and I had to drink Pedialyte. And to this day, I can't stand Pedialyte. So I had to drink Pedialyte for a couple of days to get my fluids back up, and then I did what they call the flood dose, which is, I believe, was just 1 pill. It's a capsule of powder.
So you're not in the room for the 24-hour or then 2-week period. You do other things.
No, you go and you go hiking and you go swimming and you go in the ocean. And the day after I did my iboga treatment, we went to this place called Herve al Agua, which is a natural mineral pool on the top of this mountain. The trip getting there is just bizarre. I don't know, it probably took us a couple of hours driving up a mountain like this, and looking over the ledge like that. But you get to the top of this mountain, and there are these natural mineral pools, and you get them and you swim out to the edge, and you look out, and you're just looking for miles and miles and miles. It's just an amazing, and that's part of the way that this type of ibogaine treatment is done. That's part of the treatment is becoming one with nature and trying to get back to nature and giving you opportunities to really look inside yourself. The thing about ibogaine is that it has a very, very slow half-life. So it's not like you do the treatment and boom, it takes a long time to kind of wear out of your body. So long after you take it, you're still... Your body's still processing the medicine.
During the 2-week period, are there times when someone would feel like they need the opioids or heroin or?
Well, from what I've again, I've never experienced withdrawal, thank you God, of any kind. But from what I have seen with the individuals who've been treated, well, certainly with Colin, and then with the individuals who've been treated that I've been a part of since Colin started doing the treatments, is it's minute compared to what you go through with typical withdrawal. I'll always, like when Colin's doing a treatment, I'll call him and I'll say, well, how's it going? And he'll say, it just slid right off of him. It just slid right off of him.
Is someone with you that whole 2-week period?
Well, depending on how, what your level is. If you're fairly independent, or like sometimes somebody might come back for what they call a booster, like a reboost. And you want them to spend time alone to process. I remember when my husband was there, the woman who was treating him was the same woman who treated Colin, and she sent me a picture of my husband on the edge of the swimming pool looking out into the trees, and she made some kind of a comment about him being one with nature or something like that. So you want them to spend time alone, like not during the treatment, but the treatment it's actually less than 24 hours typically.
How old was Colin when he first started on the opioids and then went to heroin?
He would have to answer that. And Jeff Alderton did a series of articles on our family back in June. He did one that kind of focused on the story I'm telling you, the mother's story. And he interviewed Colin for a couple months prior to doing that. And so he really got the skinny straight from Colin. Because, I only know what I knew. But I think that Colin would say probably 21, 22 he got into opiates. And, of course, said he'd never do heroin, and then said he'd never do a needle. And but an interesting thing, probably one of the first times I gave this, shared my story publicly like this, I was talking with Colin afterwards, and I said, Colin, I told them the story about how we did the 4 intakes in one day, in one 24-hour period, and how I walked into that room and saw those bruises on your arm, and that's how I knew you were doing heroin. And he said to me, Mom, when you saw those bruises on me, I had just started doing heroin. I had only done it a couple of times with a needle. That's why I asked for help then. I knew I was in trouble. And see, that part of our story was 3 or 4 years before he went to Mexico. So each time, and I'm not saying this for anybody else, but I'm saying for our family, each time Colin went to a residential treatment facility, the relapse was much worse after that. And when he went to the facility in Pennsylvania, and then he ended up in the halfway house, and then he was so close to Philadelphia, that's where his habit got really bad. He was going into Philadelphia, into the deepest, darkest crevices of Philadelphia, and he had to get heroin. So when I was looking to see if that was Colin had a comment. When I tell this story, you know, I often, you know, you don't know how it would have been. What if? But what if we would have known about Ibogaine on that first Saturday night when we were sitting on that porch with him, and instead of going to those 4 intakes? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I didn't know enough about it at the time to know how desperate the situation was. And would I have been willing to do something as bizarre as send my son to a third world country and for a treatment that nobody I knew had ever heard of? And when we mentioned it to family members, they just looked at us like we had 3 heads, you know. And they had been, you know, to be fair, our family members, you know, they had gone through from a distance, you know, our heartache, and you know, they loved Colin too, and they wanted him to beat it, but they weren't as intimately involved with it as we were, of course. But I remember one uncle saying, one of my husband's brothers saying to him, "Please don't let Colin go to Mexico. They'll kill him," you know. So.
We are live streaming on both Karen and my pages, which is something that is groundbreaking, hasn't been done before. So we do have questions that are coming in, and our Ryan Brenneman will have some of these questions. Ryan, would you let us know some of the questions that are coming in today?
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that Colin is actually online,
yeah,
and answering live for everyone.
Oh, good.
Who has some
Thank you,
questions.
Colin.
So,
yeah. He knows a lot more about it than I do.
Well, how do you spell Ibogaine?
Ibogaine.
Okay. Is it required prescription in
Well,
Mexico?
it's illegal in the United States.
But in Mexico?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. I think you've answered everything I have. Thank you.
Our website is www.evolveibogaine.com. And on that website, there are a tremendous amount of links, good videos, all kinds of information. There's the phone number. The phone number calls Colin directly. And then we also have a Facebook page, Evolve Ibogaine, Ibogaine. And again, we don't do this to drum up business. We don't make money out of what we do. And the reason I do this is because when I was going through this, there was no one there for me to talk to. I have some dear friends. I have some dear best friends who got me through the early stages. But as far as understanding the options that were available, the tools that you need to have in your toolkit for going through this, there was nobody there for me to speak to. And I always say this, I could have written the script 1,000 times for Colin's life. I would have never written the script the way it turned out. But I do believe that our family went through this because my mother didn't have any shy children, and God knew I would share with others. I believe that in the bottom of my heart, and so that's why we share.
It's important to have honesty and show that there is hope. So that's awesome. That is just foundational to us, isn't it, as moms and somebody that's gone through something that's so difficult, where you almost lost your son. You could have lost your son through this. So honesty and hope. And for everyone watching, there is hope. And through Christ Jesus, there is hope in our faith. We want to invite anybody that has questions, please put them on the live stream, either on Karen's live stream page or on mine, and we'll try to get the question answered that you have for her. Ryan, do we have any more questions coming in? Okay, not at this time. We do have here in the room, Trish, would you like to ask a question to Karen?
As far as like the medicine after the 24-hour period or the 2 weeks that you're there, is there an ongoing like dose, or is it just for them?
There is not an ongoing dose, and to me that's the most amazing thing about it, because having gone through the Suboxone treatment and the methadone treatment and the things that require so much follow through and follow up. What's required by Ibogaine after the initial flood dose is for you to do the work on yourself. That's the most important thing. You have to be willing to do, and I would not recommend anybody do Ibogaine unless he or she is committed to getting clean and working on it. There's a tremendous amount of work to do on yourself, and Colin is over 6 years clean, and he still works on himself constantly. He's just now really dealing with the physical problems that got him into the opiate addiction in the beginning. He had stomach issues his whole life, and that's really what got him into opiate abuse early on. And he's just now getting into the medical issues that he kind of put off, and the drug addiction took over. And he had a hernia surgery in Mexico in a clinic. He paid $750 for the entire surgery, and so that was he did that all in Spanish. And through all of this, he learned another language. He learned another culture, and he's living a truly authentic life.
So how do people know what they're supposed to work on in their life? Like, does somebody instruct them, or is that what's coming to you in the
That's
vision?
what comes to you.
Okay.
That's what comes to you. Yeah, it truly
is your subconsciousness.
Yes, it truly is a miracle. You have to be willing. This is not a kind of therapy that, like, I talk to mothers all the time who I want to get my son there. It's not something that can be forced on somebody else. And really, the reason I think it worked for Colin was because Colin found it. Believe me, I had been out looking for everything. I was researching everything. He found this, and it spoke to him.
And it seems to me, as you told the story, that Colin had a desire to be free the whole time. I mean,
yes, I have to say that he did.
He really wanted help.
Yeah, I have to say that he did. I mean, there were lots of times he continued to use for a very long time, but he was very, very miserable and always looking for help.
So if you decide this path and you go to Mexico, would you just be better off, like your son, to stay there rather than maybe come back to the States?
Well, I think that definitely you have to change your environment. You absolutely have to change your environment. It's such a difficult habit to break. And I always say, like, the grooves are so drawn into the, and it's just so easy to fall into that groove again when it's, like if drinking is your thing, if you've always sat here and you've always had your drink here and it's just like I have a thing with, I sit down at night, I want to watch TV, I want to have candy, and then when I sit down, I was like, oh, I want candy, it's just something like that. I just think that, there's no question in my mind that the fact that Colin stayed there, and he didn't have a plan. Colin had a lot going for him too. He didn't have any emotional ties. And I remember saying to the woman prior to him going down there, I said, there is nothing for Colin to come back here to except his dad, his brother, and me, and we will come to him wherever he is. And we have gone to Mexico more times than I can count in the last. We're very, very blessed to be able to do that, and then, of course, to purchase our home down there. And but the fact that he didn't come back, I know, has a lot to do with his recovery. He knows that, but he comes back all the time now. He's come when he first came. The first couple times, I would worry about him, when he'd go see his friends and stuff. I would worry about him, just like I fell back into the same track of that we lived before. Certainly not now, but I mean he will come. He has come for as long as 2 months at a time. Typically, he just comes for about 2 weeks at a time.
But you can't bring that drug with you, right?
No, you cannot. No, and he would never do that. It's illegal in the United States. It's a Schedule I drug.
I know he's changed his surroundings, but you said he had a key to the opioid cabinet. Mm-hmm. That would seem like terrible, temptation.
But that's my point.
Yeah.
It's not. He's not tempted. It's like when my husband and I will go out to dinner with another couple, and inevitably somebody will say, "Do you mind if we drink?" And Mike always answers with the same answer. No, if I wanted a drink, I'd have one. I don't want one.
So since he is this well, right, and he's not tempted, could he change his surroundings back to the U.S.?
Oh, absolutely. But why would he?
Right. But,
He absolutely could.
He could.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he could live here now without being tempted. His wife is Mexican, and his baby is Mexican-American, and they have a wonderful life in Mexico.
Okay, anybody else have any questions? Do we have questions online? Nope. Okay. Carolyn?
So, just so I'm clear, if he were to relapse again on heroin or opiates, you said it could be fatal?
Right. Well, if the ibogaine were still in his body, and if he did, the opiate receptors are reset. And I don't know. I mean, I say that because I've read it a million times, and I really don't know what that means. But I just know that what has happened, what I've known to have happened is, as a matter of fact, when Colin went to the clinic that he went to, there had just been a man there that the people who, you become part of their family when you treat them, and because it's just such a personal experience. And they had a man there that they loved and adored who had just gone home and had reused and had died. And it's your opiate receptors are rewired, and if you go back to using the same amount that you used prior to, that tends to be the issue.
Say, like, if he, being so far out, that drug is still not in the system, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Now, I think that every once in a while he might do a booster dose. And quite frankly, when he had that surgery, he had a little bit of an issue after the surgery, just trying to get through it, trying to get through the anesthesia, and they gave him opiates during the surgery, and he had some issues with that. So he probably did a booster dose or try to get.
We do have an online question that Ryan's going to read for us. Thank you.
Yeah, some people are just asking how they could watch it later. And it's going to be on Facebook on both of your pages, and we'll also post it to YouTube under New Grace Media, and so they can be shared. We've already shared the website online, and so that's on Facebook as well. So you can hit the link for that.
Great. Thank you, Ryan.
I said earlier that I could have written the script 1,000 times and I wouldn't have written it the way it turned out. But I assure you that I wouldn't change one bit of the script because of the life that we have now as a family. And my little granddaughter.
What's her name?
Mila. Thank you for asking. She is the light of our life. I call her our little game changer.
That's so sweet.
Yeah.
Why would they give him opioids when he had his surgery?
Well, they had to. It was a hernia surgery, and I don't know. I mean, they knew. I mean, he was very upfront and honest with them about his previous problems, and it was pain issues. So, but he got through it. I mean, all things considered, he got through it pretty well. But see, for somebody, I do believe that your opiate receptors are, individualized too. I want to tell you a really quick story. Both of our sons had their tonsils and adenoids taken out on the same day. They're 5 years apart. I'm a manager, and it just seemed like a good idea to me at the time. I assure you it was not a good idea. But they both had their tonsils and adenoids out on the same day. My youngest son had a steak dinner the next day. 2 weeks later, and Colin was about 13 at the time. 2 weeks later, I had to take Colin back to the doctor to have IV fluids put in because he was dehydrated, because he wouldn't eat, he wouldn't drink, he just wanted the pain medicine when he was 13. Now, I look back on that all the time now, and I think, was there a signal there? Was there a message? But I mean, what mother of a 13-year-old thinks he's going to have a drug issue? Colin grew up in a two-parent family with extended cousins. He had cousins who were more like siblings, aunts and uncles and grandparents, and he was dearly loved. He played sports. He was on the football teams and the wrestling teams. He played the violin for Christmas services at church. He had a nice little life, but that was from the outside looking in. From the inside looking out, it wasn't right for him. So.
My doctor told me one time we all have different pain levels.
Yes.
So
yes.
What one son could stand, the other one.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know anything about the opioid receptors, as you called them. Can they tell, medically through testings that they are reset? Or do they just kind of feel like they're reset because the thinking process changes?
Yeah, I don't think there's a medical evidence of it.
So it's more like a healing of the mind and
it absolutely is a healing of the mind and
that
the heart.
They feel like it's all reset.
Yes.
And then you can work from there. Mm-hmm. Jane would like to know if there's any counseling done during the treatment.
Absolutely, and different levels depending on the needs of the individual. And what Colin does in his little clinic in Puerto Escondido is he works with the individuals and sees what their needs are. He has access to acupuncture and massage and yoga and just a multitude of different things. So. And it's just, we also do eco vacations. You don't have to be a drug addict to come down to our place, and he'll build that. Colin's degree is in recreation, and he's a phenomenal tour guide, and he'll do a survey what your interests are. For example, when I went down. And he knows me pretty well. But when I went down for my private 2-week session, he had me taking me to all these little villages for different shopping experiences. And I had always been a shopper, and I really am not a shopper anymore. It's funny about that, but he took me to these little villages. There was this one little village called Teotitlan, where everyone everything in the village, their whole commerce is from selling these tapetes, tapestries, large carpets, amazing pieces of art. These huge carpets, and everything in those carpets, the dyes, the threads, everything comes out of this one little village. And it, so we did that one day, and we went to this other shopping village. It's not like shopping here. It's like it's a completely different experience. But he kind of tailor fit that trip, like for me. So it might be surfing, it might be hiking, just whatever your interests are.
Does the facility have a name? Did I miss that?
Evolve Ibogaine. And again, I'm not trying to drum up business.
Pass the penny.
Are there a good many Americans that come down to Mexico for this kind of treatment?
It's all Americans.
It's all Americans.
Good question.
He has treated some Mexicans really kind of pro bono because he wants to give back to the people that he lives with. But this is primarily Americans coming down, and Canadians, Americans.
What actually makes it illegal, like the drug? I mean, does it have to be? It's just because of our strict regulations in the United States, or? I mean, what is it? I mean, I know you said what it is.
Legislation. It's legislation. Yeah. Well, and deaths occur from Ibogaine, but they've been minute. I mean, Ibogaine itself, if there's a death, it's because it's mixed with something else, Whereas if you look at the number of deaths that occur because of heroin, it's astronomical. But I feel very strongly that the reason it's illegal is because there's no money to be made on it. I feel very strongly about that.
Wow.
Uh-huh. Yeah. It's political.
Insurance won't cover.
No. Well, that varies. I can tell you that when we sent Colin, basically 7 years ago, we paid just under $10,000 for 2 weeks. Colin has a sliding scale, and he tailors that to. But typically, if it's a heroin addiction, typically he charges $5,000 for 2 weeks. But then you have to pay, you have to get yourself there. You have to get a passport and a plane ticket. And
Where at Mexico?
well, there are clinics all over Mexico, all over. Ours is in Puerto Escondido, which it's a good day of travel to get there.
Are all the clinics involved? I'm going to pass the mic to Jane. Thank you. Are all the
Clinics part of the Evolve?
No.
Ibogaine?
Evolve is just our little clinic. But you can Google. The only thing I would ask for local people is that if you are at all considering Ibogaine, please talk to Colin. You do not have to use our clinic. We're not about that at all. But the Ibogaine world is a very kind of closed world, and they do. Colin has researched every single one of them, and he can tell you where the good ones are, and depending on if you're looking for something totally different than he offers in his clinic, then he'll set you in the right direction. Absolutely, I appreciate you asking that question, because there are a multitude of clinics, and if you remember. A bit ago, I mentioned that I found a clinic in Toronto, a guy named Matt in Toronto. I had him in my phone for years. Matt in Toronto, that's how I had him in my phone. And I feel sure that had Colin gone there, that I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you ladies today. So.
Thank you for being brave.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
It's so nice that what Karen is doing, it's breaking down stigmas, because I think that's hard for a lot of moms, isn't it? A lot of families Like you said, at first you wanted to go to
Absolutely.
Virginia.
Absolutely.
But what we've discovered the last 10 months that we've been having our ladies prayer group is that it touches all of our lives, whether it's somebody that's very educated or somebody that has zero education. It touches so many people's lives. In your day-to-day walk through town, you don't know who you're rubbing elbows with, that this heroin epidemic could be touching their lives. So to have Karen come and share from her heart, it really does help break down the stigmas, that it touches so many people. We need to have compassionate hearts, because you never know when it's going to happen. It might not be in your immediate family. It could be your cousin. It could be a nephew and niece. So we do need to be educated about the different options that are out there, about what heroin is, and take that information. And what our ladies group is about is we want to take the education that we are learning and marry that with our prayers, so that we can be specific in our prayer life as we're praying for the person that's struggling with addiction, for their parents, for the children of those that are struggling with addiction. We need to be educated. And so we invite you to come each Friday. That usually 3 of the 4 Fridays a month, we do have a guest speaker that is coming to share. And 1 Friday a month, we meet from 2 to 4. And 1 Friday a month, we take those 2 hours and we spend the time in prayer. Several of you have sent messages to us, private messages, asking us to pray for your child, for your grandchildren, for parents. And we want to do that. We are doing that. We also are spending time in prayer for the professionals in our community that are helping, that are reaching out to those that are battling addiction, their families as well. There's so many people that are trying to help. So if you want to come physically and be here with us in my house, you're welcome to. After the cameras go off, we always have a wonderful interaction with our guest speakers, more questions, more answers. But if you live far, thankfully we thank Ryan Brenneman for providing this clear video, this clear audio that you can see and ask questions that can get answered. So either way you go, just know that we are here. We're going to keep on going until the Lord gives me the sign it's time to be done and move on to another project. My boss always tells me there's always going to be a project, and that's true. We want to keep working until the Lord comes. So at this time I want to ask, are there any more questions that anybody has here or on the live stream? Alrighty, well, we thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for caring.
Yeah, and thank you, Colin, for being there on the live stream to answer questions as well. And thank you, Ryan, for being there. So next Friday, again, like I said earlier, next Friday, December 15th, will be our Christmas potluck here at my house. If you'd like to come, send me a private message, and I'll give you directions how to get up here. We're going to have a fun time, lots of games, and we'll be reading the Christmas story, because this truly is about Christ. Jesus is the reason for the season. And as you're driving around in your car, when you have your children or grandchildren, make sure and point out the nativities. Kind of make it like a Where's Waldo, where it's fun for them to I saw that. Grandma, look, here's this. Mommy, look, there's another nativity. Make it where they're making a point to be aware of the nativities that are put out. So thank you all again for joining us. Please come back. We will see you again soon, and God bless.